Welcome to Mokena's Front Porch, a Mokena history podcast with Matt Galick and hosted by me, Israel Smith. All right, Matt. This week we talked to Mr. David Kropp, and a really interesting guy and a staple of the community.
Yes.
And a very interesting conversation in relation to St. John's and his long time there, as well as the community. So what do you know about Mr. Kropp?
Yeah, well, Mr. Kropp is not only an extremely kind, friendly, and generous guy, to begin with, but he's a real rarity because he's one of the last people around to tell us what pre-World War II life was like in the church, St. John's, but also just in Mokena as a whole. He's not the only one. So he'll be 90 in the spring, and there are a few other people out in town still who are his age, and even older, but not many at all. So, his memories and everything he's experienced over the years are really valuable, and he has made the history of Mokena come alive for me in just a lot of ways over the years. All the years I've known him, his all of the branches of his family, both his dad's side and his mom's side, are steeped in Mokena history. His great-grandma and grandpa Kropp came here to Mokena in 1857, at which point Mokena was only 5 years old. And of course, as I believe he touches on, his cousin on his dad's side was Laverne Yunker,
He sure was, yeah.
Of Yunker Farm fame, of course. A lot of
people. He shared stories of growing up on the farm and spending time out on the farm as a child.
Of course, yeah. Oh, definitely he would. Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, his grandfather on his mom's side. I could talk about everybody in his family. Everybody played some role in the history of this town. But his grandpa Kreis, William Kreis, would be familiar to our listeners, and of course, longtime Mokena people, as being the pastor of St. John's from 1917 till, without having my file on him in front of me, I want to say he left the pastorate here around 1925 or thereabouts. But in any case, Pastor Kreis's big-time claim to fame in the history of Mokena is the fact that he was the builder of the current St. John's that is in use today. So that kind of sealed him into Mokena history right there. Yeah, I had the pleasure. Well, first of all, Dave is basically a neighbor of mine. He lives, not like next door neighbors or anything, but he lives just around the corner from me. And I can remember his mother living there at the family house when I was really little. And then Dave moved back to Mokena because he grew up here, of course. And then he spent some time in the Army during the Korean War years. And then he went to school at IIT in the city. He may have tread over all this when you guys talked, but his career took him all over the place. Like, he even lived in Aspen, Colorado for a while. But
he said he lived 50 years outside of Mokena.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. Absolutely. And then he later on, as he got kind of on in years, he moved back to Mokena and moved back into the family homestead here in town. And basically, what I'm getting to, I'm trying to tell the long-winded story of how I got to know him. He came to or would come to Mokena Historical Society meetings pretty long time ago, right when the organization was first kind of getting off the ground in the very early 2000s. And that's when I got to know him really well. What struck me about him, aside from just being, as I was kind of saying, just a really nice guy, a real interesting guy, was that he always had the patience to sit with me and let me just ask him question after question about people he knew years ago, places in town, events in town. And that's what kind of formed our relationship. And he is a dear friend of mine to this day. And I love every second that I can spend with him. He's a real pillar, not only of his church of St. John, but also just in the community in general, I would say. Yeah, just a really great guy.
I agree. He had a broad array of topics, and one of the things that you mentioned, he really wanted to talk about what Mokena was like during the war, and he was in grade school, and things that they did to support the effort.
Exactly.
And,
absolutely.
And he talked about, like I said, growing up on the farm and being around on the Yunker farm at that time. And it's a great conversation, and it's great to have your input, Matt, because I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know, might not know who he is. So it's nice to have a little introduction and get a little background before we hear our conversation. It gives them a little more understanding to a lot of the stories. So anything else you want to add about Mr. Kropp before we get into the story?
Yeah, no, just that that if you don't know him, you should get to know him, because he's a really nice guy, and he will definitely change your life once you get to know him. You can find him at St. John's. You can ask anybody there for Dave Kropp, and they all know him. He's one of our last links with a really interesting period in the village's history. So
yeah, I can't think of a better way than that to get into our conversation. Mr. Kropp, thank you for having me today, and I'm looking forward to talking about Mokena and your life here. So why don't we start? Tell me a little bit about how long you've been in Mokena.
Well, first of all, I'd like you to be reminded that my name is Dave.
All right. We'll call you Dave from now on.
All right. Well, we are recording this in a 100-year-old house that had been my home, family home, and my mother and dad had it built in the early 20s.
Wow.
And it was built on property that had been actually the orchard for an older home that was partially a home for a while for my great-grandfather, and my dad's mother and sister gave 3 plots of land to their nephews, and Dad got the plot where my house is located, and then next door at the corner of Wolf and 3rd Street, my uncle Milton got that plot, and across Lincoln Highway, where the funeral parlor now is, my Uncle Carl got that plot. So when I grew up, there were 2 cousins in each house, and so there were lots of wonderful cousins to play with and to build memories with.
How far back does your family go? Obviously to your great-grandparents.
1874, I think, is the earliest recorded.
And who is that to you?
That was My great-grandfather and grandmother.
And how did they end up coming to Mokena?
I don't know that story for those people, but my mother's father, Reverend Kreis, came to St. John's Church and had a choice between Mokena and a parsonage and church farther north. And my grandmother said, I vote for Mokena because I can get on the train and get to the symphony. And so that was the reason for my being here was music.
Wow. So say that again. Your great-grandfather was Reverend Kreis?
No, my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
My mother's father.
And so Matt addressed him a lot in your booklet.
Yes.
His time here was a huge period of growth. Matt said there was 200% growth in the church over his time.
Yes.
And he was instrumental in the building of the St. John's Church.
He guided it. And one thing he insisted on was good acoustics. And he went to an acoustic engineer somewhere down near St. Louis and talked to them, and they reviewed the plans for the church and adjusted things so that the sanctuary of St. John's has very good acoustics.
Wow, that's amazing. So did you know your grandfather growing up?
I did not know that grandfather. He was killed in an auto accident the year before I was born. But I did know his wife very well. She lived next door to us because when Grandpa was killed, Dad had a house built on part of this land that had been their tennis court.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up next to that grandmother. But my father's parents, who lived on Front Street in Mokena, I knew Grandpa very well. But Grandma died when I was about 6, so I didn't have a lot of time with her.
Now, on Front Street, maybe I'm wrong, is that where they had a business on Front Street?
Yes.
The general store?
Well, Dad and his uncle had a hardware store.
Now, in the book, they're the ones that purchased the former church building, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And rolled it over to the new location where it is now as a single-family home.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Which is a really interesting story. I don't know if you know any more, or you can give a little, anything you know about that story.
I don't really know much about it.
Matt had a really good write-up back in the Messenger, when the Messenger newspaper was around, and the detail of rolling it on logs and moving it there, and really neat to see. And now looking at it, it's so clear. When you know that it was a church, you can see it still has the shape of a church.
Yes, yes. Well, it was quite an ordeal in the late teens.
Yeah. And how long did they have the business on Front Street?
I really don't know how long, but my grandfather was an entrepreneur, and they also built a building back in the teens to be the entertainment center for Mokena. And it later became the Ford Garage, which burned down probably in the early 50s.
Wow.
But their hardware store was east of that site.
And the hardware store, just so everybody's clear, sat at Front Street and Division?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. People my age remember it as Dunham's Hardware. But it had a couple of names.
So you grew up in this house that we're sitting in today. You grew up here as a young child.
Yes.
So say as a young child, what was it like growing up in Mokena?
Oh, it was wonderful. We were completely free to do whatever we wanted to anywhere.
What does that mean? What?
Well, it meant that a couple of little buddies of mine when we were in grade school could take knapsacks and go down to Hickory Creek and camp out for the night. There was no fear. And we would take some food along and some hot dogs and sticks and we were completely free to wander throughout the village. And in fact, we didn't realize as children that we were being so well watched by everybody, because everybody knew everyone. And we had dogs that wandered around once in a while, and we would get phone calls, and they would say that our dog was in their tomato patch, and we should come get him. And he had gone to the other side, the south side of the tracks. So Mokena was a little village, but everybody knew each other, and there were 4 main churches: St. Mary's Catholic Church, and the Lutheran Church, and the Methodist Church, and St. John's Church. And every church except the Methodist had a set of bells for ringing. And they were communication systems, because when someone died, a bell would ring, and the children would stop and count, and they would say, "Oh, Lutheran Church, 75 years old," and our parents would know exactly who had died.
Wow. From how many times they rang the bell?
Yes.
Wow. That's really interesting. So now, the only bells I know that are here are St. John's bells. Is that right?
St. Mary's has bells.
Okay.
Yes.
So being in downtown, maybe I'm a little further.
Well, and St. Mary's Church has moved about a mile west of their original church.
And was the original church there where the cemetery is ever in regular use while you were in your time?
Oh, yes, it was.
So what was...
you mean the St. Mary's Church?
Yes. St. Mary's right here.
Mm-hmm.
That was... do you know when they moved, when they moved?
I really don't.
No, okay. So back to your house here.
Yes.
Have you done any changes, any renovations, any differences from when you were a kid growing up?
Well, the interior furnishings have changed completely, but I still sleep in my nursery bedroom. I have a bigger bed now.
That's good.
But I did live away from Mokena for maybe 55 years. So this has not been my home continuously, although my parents lived here and I visited them regularly, even when I lived in Colorado or Washington, D.C. So this has always been my anchor.
So when was the first time you moved away from Mokena? At what age?
I was about 22. I moved to Chicago to go to Illinois Institute of Technology.
Okay. And was there a time that you came back? You lived in Mokena again after that, or were you... was that the 50-year stretch?
I was back and forth all the time. In fact, when I was in college, I would jump on the train and come back to St. John's for choir practice on Wednesdays, and then be back here on Sundays.
Do you remember how long of a train ride that was at that time?
A little over an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what were you riding in at that time? It wasn't the Metro like we have today.
It was the Rock Island line.
Was it a similar train car like we'd see today, the Metro car, or was it on a...
Oh, it was a much different car. And in fact, we would take the Rock Island train to Joliet to go to high school.
Oh, wow.
We did not have a high school in Mokena. We had the first 2 years here for a while, but when I was in high school, we would go to Joliet and catch the 7:20 every morning. And
how about that?
Some of the cars, because they knew they were going to be inhabited by students, they gave us the old cars, and some of them actually had high-backed velvet seats, and
wow,
really old-fashioned.
Oh, that's really interesting.
But the train station was not where it's located now. It was on the north side of the tracks. And it was a wooden building with wide planked wooden floors. And at that time, because they used coal, there were grits of ash everywhere. And so riding a train to school was okay in the morning, but coming back in the evening, we would be not covered, but we would have coal dust on us.
That's interesting. How about your family? Did you grow up with any siblings?
Yes, I had two brothers.
And did they stay in the area, or did they leave?
They eventually left, and they're both deceased.
Okay. So your parents maintained this house then mostly?
They lived here full time.
And when, until they both were passed away?
Yes.
And then at that time, did you take over the house then? What brought you back to Mokena?
Well, I came back to help my mother in her last years.
Okay.
And although I was at that time living north of Plainfield, so it was just a short trip.
Sure.
And then they also had a summer place at Bass Lake, Indiana, and eventually a place in Florida, and they bounced around. And so I bounced with them to help drive in the later years.
Very nice. So I want to circle back a little bit to St. John's.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about the 100-year anniversary that they just had in the opening of the time capsules.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about the part that you played in the 100-year anniversary.
Well, I'll first talk about my grandfather, Reverend Kreis, because he loved photography, and he took a number of photographs of the original, of the building being built and the original cornerstone box being placed. And I had those photographs.
Wow.
And so the part that I played was passing my grandfather's photographs enlarged to the committee.
Wow, that's really interesting. How fortunate that he was interested in photography and able to record those moments.
Yes.
Do you have a lot of other things of his photographs? Or?
A lot of family photographs, including the first parsonage that they were in, which is the two-story house across the street. And I also have photographs of things that happened at church. especially outside things. There were summertime picnics, and Grandpa had photographs of those. And those picnics were rather interesting because they were called basket picnics, I think, something like that. Anyway, they were money raisers for the church. And the ladies and the girls would pack baskets. And my dad said that they knew that certain ladies had the best fried chicken or the best apple pie, and they were told the colors and the designs of the ribbons that were tied to the baskets, and their girlfriends would tie the same color ribbons to their hair, and so you always knew who you were going to have dinner with by offering money for the best basket.
Oh, that's great. In the booklet that Matt wrote, it covers a lot of the fundraising and the different creative avenues that they took. A purse raffle sounded like was one of them, and different bake sales, and to bring the community and get the community involved in the fundraising, which was a huge task for them at the time.
Oh, yes.
Anything you can share about that? What from your grandfather or grandmother's memories?
They didn't talk about that particular aspect.
We looked up, and roughly spent, and the details are in the book, about $60,000 was the end cost to build St. John's 100 years ago.
Yes.
And that cost in today's money works out to $1,060,000.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And it really brings it into a clear perspective of what a huge undertaking that they went through to build the church that is still standing here today.
Yes. Well, the members of the congregation wanted to do something more than another wooden church. They had a chance to remodel the original church and enlarge it somehow. But they had higher aspirations for the congregation. And they went through and pulled it off.
So what do you think the significance of that building has been to the community over the last 100 years?
Well, when it was first built, the first floor, the downstairs floor, was used by a lot of community fundraisers and meetings and dartball games. And there was a little stage at the south end of that downstairs area. And it was used by a number of, I remember the Methodist choir coming over and giving a concert. And we were very close to the Methodist church as children. And I, at one time, had a Methodist girlfriend, and a Methodist buddy of mine had a St. John's girlfriend.
And was that frowned upon in the community at all?
No, it was very welcome.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, no, it was very welcome.
So you said you went to high school, to jump around a little bit, but you went to high school in Joliet.
Joliet Junior Township High School.
And then how about grade school, this up to high school? Where were you?
Well, grade school was actually in the building where Mokena
Village Hall?
Village Hall is.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very close walk for you then.
Oh, yes. We always walked to school. Except when it was really hard to rain. But when I was growing up, that was before World War II and during World War II. And before that, there was the Depression. So people were very cautious about using gasoline to take students. So we would bundle up and take a walk for the most part.
How did you grew up with your family around, right? You had aunts and uncles, and how important do you think that was to you and to your kind of sense of community and growing up here, and how did having that, do you think, affect you as a person?
Oh, it affected me very strongly because our house always seemed to be a center of activity. And since my one grandmother lived next door and the other lived on the other side of town, which was 4 blocks away, they would be here for dinner every night. And uncles and aunts would also come, and cousins. And so we always had family around the table.
And your home here was kind of the center for Laverne?
It was one of the centers. And my father's home on Front Street was the center for Thanksgiving celebrations. And we often had 18 or 20 people for dinner that day. And to prepare for it, my mother and aunts would clean the house, and I would walk up for my lunchtime walk, and that gave me a chance to be with other students from other parts of town. So there was a great mingling of people in town. It was very comfortable.
Yeah. What are some of your early memories of downtown? Obviously, with your family having the business there, was a large part of Front Street.
Well, but by the time I was growing up, they no longer had business in town.
Okay.
But my best memories of the downtown area were the smooth sidewalks for skating. And they were the ones that had originally been laid with Joliet limestone, huge slabs of limestone. And in between, maybe they would last for skating for a block or two, and in between would just be gravel.
And you say skating, you mean just on roller skates?
Roller skates.
Oh, wow.
The kind you clamp onto your shoes.
And was Front Street gravel at the time? Or was it paved?
Yes, it was. I don't remember when it was paved with macadam, which is like blacktop. But part of my memories has it blacktopped.
The house that we live in was built in 1900, and when we were buying it, one of the things I asked the previous owner, who'd been there for 48 years, the Gauss. I don't know if you knew the Gauss. And Mr. Gauss said, I asked him, what's the biggest difference between now and when you moved in? He said the roads were gravel. It was gravel roads.
Exactly.
And I even 47 years ago at the time, I thought, wow, that I couldn't believe that this town, even just then, had gravel roads.
Well, and it was much later that some of the roads, the local streets, had asphalt on them, but there were no curbs or no. There was a sidewalk, and there was a plot of grass or weeds, and then there was the gravel street. And I remember that the sidewalk and the grass area was higher than the street because I could sit on the grass and have my feet down, so that the roads were much lower.
And what about some of the businesses that you remember on Front Street? Any of your favorites that you remember going to as a young person?
Gus Brown's ice cream parlor.
And where was that?
That was at the corner of Front Street and Mokena.
Okay. And relative to now, would we be like where the bank is? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Where the bank parking lot is and the bank building itself.
And what was your favorite to get from Gus's?
I don't really remember a favorite, but I do remember that some of my grade school girl friends or girl acquaintances, I use the word girlfriend cautiously, but we were all friends. But they would be hired by Gus and be taught how to dip ice cream so that there would be a hollow in the middle, because during the war and afterwards, ice cream was a very special thing. And so I remember eating ice cream cones and sticking my tongue into the hollow of the ice cream. He also sold bubble gum, which was rather special. But a northward extension of the parlor was a pool hall. And there was a door, maybe a double door between the two, but we were cautioned as children not to go there because sometimes the language was a little rough. So those are memories that are very strong. The other thing is that there were horse tying areas. There were like old posts, farm posts or telephone posts sunk in the ground with a pipe between them. And the horses would be tied up there. And those pipes were great for turning somersaults on. And my dad would always say, when I told him that I was going uptown, he would say, okay, but just remember the horses were there too.
What'd that mean? You got to look out for the droppings?
Exactly. And uptown, when we would go up to a grocery store, we were going uptown. But if we were going downtown, that meant to Chicago. And everybody knew that, those phrases.
Yeah. How about the farm? You talk a little bit about the Yunkers and the farm and your life kind of growing up around them.
Well, Ed Yunker used to join us for Thanksgiving. And I remember that was the first time that I had ever met him. And Laverne Yunker says, she was a Laverne Kropp. You know, maybe I should explain that the German A is almost pronounced like our pronunciation of O. And so our family name began as Krapp, but the women back in probably the 40s decided that Kropp was not a nice word.
Okay.
And so they changed the A to an O. So Laverne Kropp became Laverne Yunker. But she was also Laverne Kropp as far as I was concerned. But she married Ed, and they moved to the farm. And we had a number of family dinners there, and they had two sons. They were younger than I was at the time, and one was the same age as my adopted brother, and so we did spend quite a bit of time out there with the boys.
What was that like? Because even being out on the farm now and just walking around or going into the fields there, tell us a little bit about what it was like to be on that farm back in the day.
Well, the boys loved basketball, and they had a wonderful basketball court in the main barn area. But my fascination was with Ed's pigs. There was a special pig house, and I just enjoyed the pigs more than well. And in the lower area of the barn was where the cattle got milked, and that was also very interesting.
Wow!
And they had. It just seemed like many dozen cats that would know when Ed was going to do the milking, and Ed would take the teat of the cow and aim it to the various cats, and the cats would catch the milk midair.
Oh, that's great. Well, we actually got to go into that barn, and there still is a basketball hoop in there. So
Is there?
It's kind of neat to know that that's a little bit of callback to the Yunkers.
Yes.
Interesting. And so, obviously, now that the Park District has the farm, what are your thoughts on the fact that it's been kept the farmhouse, and the buildings, and we still have a big farm like that in the middle of town?
Well, I think it's quite unusual and rather important for the new people coming to town to realize the history of this as a farm community. And the Park District has done a wonderful job in keeping open space and keeping the woods and providing facilities for people. They won't know the farm that I knew, but at least it's an important historic presence.
Yeah, because obviously I never experienced it back when Mr. Yunker was farming it, or the family events, but you can stand out on that field or in the yard there, and there's the band shell now, and you kind of get the feeling of what a family party felt like, or a family event there, and you can imagine with the kids running around and what that must have been like.
Yes, well, and in your case, it doesn't take much imagination because you're a bright person and you understand these things. We used to walk down into the woods, and I have never appreciated killing anything. And the Yunkers did go hunting squirrels in the woods, and I would go with them, not as a hunting posse, but just to be in the woods. And they were very, very good about keeping the woods.
What with that, the creek, Hickory Creek,
yes,
must have played a huge part. I know it's brought up all the time by people that have grown up in Mokena, older or younger, the times they spent hiking or walking or camping, as you talked about, or just how much that creek played a part in people's lives.
Well, it was important for those that were growing up here. There was one area which was considered a dog washing area. There were flat limestone creek bed, and that's where local dogs would get washed, and that was down at the Iron Bridge. Now, the Iron Bridge was located on Schoolhouse Road.
Mr. Kropp, tell me, David, tell me a little bit about what Mokena was like during World War II.
Well, we were very involved with the war. There were a number of young men who went through the war, and some of them came back and some of them didn't. And so there was a lot of sorrow and a lot of joy mixed up. But for a kid, and I was in grade school at that time, growing up with the Boy Scouts, we had a lot of projects. For instance, through the grade school, we were asked to collect the fluff from milkweeds that was processed, and we shook off all the seeds, but the fluff was sent somewhere and became the stuffings in floating jackets for the servicemen who were in ships. We also collected newspapers, and St. John's had the original barn that faced 3rd Street, and it had a second story, and that's where the Boy Scouts would store their bundles of newspaper. And then it was very, very handy for us, because when the truck came to take the papers away, we would just throw them out of the old hayloft door, and that worked very well.
So you were a part of the Boy Scouts
yes.
At that time?
Yes. And even before, it was early grade schools that we collected the fluff.
Tell us a little bit about what the Boy Scouts were like. You know, there's still an active Boy Scout community here in Mokena.
Yes, it's sponsored by a number of sponsors, but St. John still has a sponsorship.
And we just got, a couple weeks ago, they had the spaghetti dinner up there at the Boy Scouts at the community center that we got to go to and enjoy. So,
yes.
What was your experience with the Scouts in that time growing up as a young person, and considering that the war effort was going on as well?
Yes. Well, our effort for the war was to collect things and to save things and to do whatever we could.
Did it make you feel like you were contributing, you were being a part of this national effort?
Absolutely. Yes, and it was with great pride that the boys confronted each other at school about what they did and bragged about what they did.
So what was it like as young people were being, from what you remember, being sent off to war? Do you remember hearing of young people you knew going away?
Oh yes. My schoolmates had brothers and cousins that were sent. And the family right across the street lost a young man, and he was a good buddy of mine. Not that we were the same age, but we were in the same neighborhood, so we played kick the can together and baseball
and what was that a concern of yours by the time you were old enough to serve? Was the war over? Was it getting close to being over?
The war was over. Yeah.
So was military service ever something you considered?
Well, I was in the Army, but much later. But back to the war, it was an interesting time because everything was so limited. My mother played the organ at St. John's, and she would go to practice in the wintertime, and I would go with her, and we would have one little flashlight or a beam, and I would sit in the front pew and try to do my homework with mittens on, and there were also, of course, shortages of certain foods, so church activities that incorporated foods were changed to meet the needs.
Anything else on that you think with the war, what you remember? Any stories of?
Well, there was a shortage of everything, and I remember that the coal supply for St. John's boiler was limited, and so they would heat up the church only for services. And so for practices of any kind, it was cold.
Wow. Well, that's speaking of St. John's, you had a little story, something about the church.
Oh,
the story. If that's something you want to.
Well, the minister's study was on the second floor, and there was a door that went outside, and there was a little porch with a flight of stairs all the way down to the ground, which was quite a staircase, but it was narrow. And it was built in such a way that there were some niches under it. And those niches were used by the naughty boys in Mokena, who hid their cigarettes there and would have a smoke.
You never found yourself under those stairs, did you?
Well, passing by, I'd be offered cigarettes, but I never did smoke.
Okay, well, that's good. What kind of thoughts would you have, for people to know for years to come, like your words of advice or your words of wisdom for Mokena?
Really enjoy the community as it is, even though there are not corn fields plotted up and down certain streets. They're gone. And even though all the sidewalks are nice and smooth and there are curbs and paved streets, that they should try to enjoy the kind of country atmosphere of Mokena, which stems from people loving each other and feeling responsible for things that happen to the lives of the residents. Mokena always, to me, showed a lot of love and concern. I've lived in other areas, and I never quite felt that feeling. And I think it's partially because of families that are still together, and partially because of their community church involvement. Mokena has a lot more churches, a number of churches more than when I was growing up. But just learning how to be a decent citizen and enjoying the peace and the wildlife that comes through on migration periods and the closeness of nature, like at the Yunker Farm.
No, that's really good. Because Mokena does still kind of beckon back to those older days. And obviously we've grown tremendously and a lot over the last 10, 15 years especially. But to be able to look back on our history, and that's why I think it's so important to talk to you and people that have had longer histories in town, because we aren't just another Chicago suburb. We're not, we grew up, a town that grew up on a train line and has continued to grow, but not so much that we've lost our past.
Yes. Well, a train line that kept us going to Chicago, but Wolf Road was an important American Indian route from mid-central Illinois all the way up into Wisconsin.
Uh-huh. So as we end, could you tell us what your favorite spot or favorite place in Mokena is, besides this beautiful home?
I can't say that I have a favorite place. There are so many corners and niches bring back memory. Oh, one favorite place is at Schoolhouse Road at the east end of 3rd Street. It was my grandfather's orchard. Oh, and wow. I spent a lot of time there with my buddies and friends playing. And right now it has nice homes, and it's a completely changed area. But in my memory, that old orchard with its crooked trees that produced beautiful fruit, wonderful tasting apples, they were a part of my memory that I think of as the old Mokena.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. Like I said, I think it's really important to share, experiences like yours and people that have had a long history here, so that as Matt has done over the years in preserving history and recording and sharing with people, we can do a similar thing, with this. And people can hear your stories that might have not got to sit down and share time with you. So I appreciate you doing that.
You're very welcome. But I do have to say that I have a lot of stories. And if anybody would like to just come and visit me and the house, they're welcome.
That's a very nice invitation for you to make to people. And maybe another time we'll talk and you can come up with some stories and we can just have a talk about stories, if that'd be something that you find
absolutely interesting. And maybe we could roast some apples over the fire.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kropp, David, as you want me to call you. This has been great, so thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Mr. David Kropp as much as I enjoyed speaking to him. I want to thank Pastor Rocky of St. John's Church, and my deepest apologies. We sat down for a few minutes and he had some very kind words to say about Mr. Kropp, but unfortunately my technical skills were not up to par, and I lost that audio, so it was not able to be included. But he had a lot of kind things to say about Mr. Kropp, how he was part of the committee that brought him to the church. He is someone who shares Mokena's history and is proud of that history, and he shares that with the church and with the community, and just how he's a kind and patient man. So thank you, Pastor Rocky, for taking time with me to talk about him. And again, I apologize it didn't make it. Please find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Mokena's Front Porch, and you'll find podcast updates, photos, documents, and other things that we find interesting about Mokena's history. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if you have a question or a comment or maybe a podcast idea for us, you can email us directly at mokenasfrontporch@gmail.com. On the next episode, we're going to talk about Mokena's only property that's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the McGovney Yunker Farm. Thank you for listening, and see you next time on Mokena's Front Porch.